20 Questions on Material and Artificial Intelligence in Architecture, written by Jonas Coersmeier, narration generated from the author's own speech. 1. Has architecture ever really been the work of a lone genius? The myth of the lone genius architect is deeply connected to the way we think about AI. Architects don't actually build, they draw. Buildings are always the result of many people working together: clients, engineers, fabricators, builders, and many others. No building has ever been created by one person. It has always been a profoundly collaborative endeavor. But even if we focus only on what is often understood as the architect's own contribution, the drawing itself, that too is already collaborative. The word draw originally meant to pull or drag across a surface. Whether it's a stick through sand, charcoal across paper, or graphite across vellum, the line never comes from the mind alone. It emerges through one material, leaving a trace upon another. Even the first mark is not simply the projection of an isolated idea onto matter. It is already a material event. My book simply asks us to take that insight one step further. If we already acknowledge that architecture emerges through many human participants, and if even drawing itself emerges through reciprocal engagement with material, why should we stop there? Materials actively shape what becomes possible. So do drawing instruments, computational systems, and now AI. Design emerges through reciprocal relationships among human and non-human participants alike. My argument is not that AI suddenly makes architecture collaborative. Architecture always has been. AI simply makes visible something that has been true from the very first line ever drawn. Architecture doesn't begin with a building. It begins with the first line, and even that first line is already shared. 2. How did architecture move from pencil and paper to AI? For most of architecture's history, architects worked through drawings, plans, sections, elevations, and perspectives constructed with pencil or ink on paper or mylar. Beginning in the 1980s, computer-aided design gradually transferred those drawings into digital space. Early CAD systems primarily reproduced two-dimensional drafting, offering greater precision, speed, and control. Over time, architectural computation shifted from 2D drawing to three-dimensional geometric modeling. The digital 3D model became the central reference for design, documentation, visualization, analysis, fabrication, and collaboration among architects, engineers, manufacturers, and other building experts. Building information modeling expanded this further by linking geometry to technical and material data. In the early 2000s, parametric and rule-based systems introduced what was sometimes called smart geometry. Architects no longer modeled only fixed forms. They constructed relationships, parameters, and procedures capable of producing families of variations. Developments in robotics and digital fabrication reinforced this geometric orientation because the 3D model remained the primary language connecting designers, machines, and materials. Architecture therefore appeared likely to enter the age of AI through geometry. But that is not what happened. AI first entered architecture primarily through the image. Platforms such as Midjourney, Stable Diffusion, and DALL-E could rapidly generate evocative architectural representations without first constructing a coherent three-dimensional model. For the first time in decades, the image preceded the geometry rather than being rendered from it. Today, geometry-based AI is beginning to emerge through image to 3D systems and AI-enhanced parametric platforms. But the larger transition is still underway, from drawing to digital geometry to rule-based computation to image AI, and now toward a possible integration of image, geometry, data, materials, and machines. Architecture entered computation through the line and the model. AI entered architecture through the image. 3. Why does AI feel fundamentally different from previous design technologies? In 2026, AI in design still largely revolves around image-based diffusion models. In their current image-based implementations, diffusion models move from structured images toward noise and learn to reverse that process, generating form through probabilistic inference rather than predefined rules. At the same time, we're now beginning a transition back to geometry. Tools like Rhino are starting to integrate AI, and beyond deterministic command-based modeling, we're entering a more probabilistic approach to design. Image AI still dominates, but AI shaping space is beginning to emerge, returning architecture to its geometric, structural, and tectonic ground. What makes AI fundamentally different, however, isn't simply that it produces better images or more complex geometry. Many people think it's just CAD on steroids. I don't. Previous computational tools extended the architect's ability to develop ideas. AI expands the architect's ability to discover them. Design becomes less the implementation of a preconceived idea and more a shared process of exploration and discovery. 4. What do we actually mean when we talk about AI in architecture today? When we talk about AI in architecture, we often imagine software that helps architects work faster or more efficiently. I think that's too narrow. AI isn't simply another digital technology added to the existing design process. It introduces another kind of design intelligence, one that is probabilistic rather than deterministic, relational rather than isolated, and capable of participating in design in ways that exceed the individual architect's own experience. That changes the nature of design itself. Instead of asking how AI can execute our intentions, we begin asking what new possibilities emerge through our interaction with it. AI isn't simply changing architectural practice, it's changing what we understand design to be. 5. How far has AI actually entered architectural practice? AI's most visible impact on architecture today is still concentrated in a relatively narrow part of the design process. Most architects still encounter AI through image generation, concept images, visualizations, mood boards, and speculative explorations. These applications have been enormously influential because they are immediate, accessible, and visually compelling. Geometry-based AI is only beginning to emerge through image-to-3D systems and AI-enhanced geometric platforms. At the same time, AI is gradually finding its way into broader architectural workflows, including BIM, documentation, and design automation. But it remains only partially integrated into the geometric processes that have historically defined architectural design. We are therefore living through a transitional moment. Image AI still dominates, but I believe architecture's deeper transformation will come when AI becomes fully embedded in geometry, materials, robotics, and construction. Today's architecture is still largely designing with images. Tomorrow's architecture will design with intelligence embedded throughout the entire process. 6. Why do I refuse to think of AI as a tool? When I first began writing the book, I still talked quite casually about tools and using AI. But by the end, during the final proofreadings, I had become very deliberate about avoiding words like tool and even use. That may sound strange at first because they're so deeply embedded in our language, but that's precisely the point. I've come to think that much of the trouble we're in has to do with our utilitarian view of the world, that we assume everything somehow exists in the service of us. Whether we're talking about nature, buildings, animals, plants, materials, or computational systems, we tend to approach them primarily as instruments for human purposes. My argument is that this should become our broader attitude toward AI as well. Rather than asking, how can I use AI as a tool? We might ask, how do we participate in a shared process of design? This isn't about anthropomorphizing AI or pretending that humans, trees, pencils, and AI systems are all the same. They clearly aren't. It's about moving beyond an instrumental worldview in which everything non-human exists merely to be exploited or controlled by us. Ultimately, this is an ecological argument. I don't think our current environmental crisis is only a technological crisis. It's also a philosophical one. The way we think about AI is deeply connected to the way we've thought about nature for centuries. If we continue approaching every non-human entity as something to master and use, we'll simply repeat the same mistakes. What I'm proposing instead is a shift toward shared materiality, a way of designing that begins with relationships rather than domination. The opposite of tool is not person. The opposite of tool is participant. 7. What does it really mean to decenter the human? Decentering the human doesn't mean diminishing the human. It means overcoming the assumption that intelligence, creativity, and agency originate exclusively in us and are then imposed onto an otherwise passive world. The ecological crisis has shown us where that worldview leads. For centuries, we've imagined ourselves as masters of nature, treating the world as inert, waiting to be controlled and exploited. I think we now know that this isn't only environmentally unsustainable, it is philosophically mistaken. My proposal is that design doesn't begin with imposing a human vision onto passive matter. It emerges through reciprocal relationships among humans, materials, environments, and now AI. Decentering the human isn't about making humans less important. It's about understanding that we have always been part of the material world rather than standing outside it. Decentering the human doesn't diminish humanity. It places humanity back into the world. 8. How does this change the way we teach and practice architecture? In my studio, we deliberately blur the boundary between material experiments and AI. Instead of beginning with a fixed concept and using materials simply to execute it, we begin by exploring materials themselves. We cast plaster, resin, pigments, ice, composites. We let materials surprise us. We call these material probes. Rather than asking materials to obey us, we ask what they suggest. This has precedence, of course. Architects and engineers like Antoni Gaudí and Frei Otto already understood that design could emerge through dialogue with materials rather than simply being imposed upon them. We extend that conversation by bringing AI into the loop. We move continuously back and forth between physical material experiments and AI. Material experiments become input for AI. AI generates new possibilities. Those possibilities return to physical making, often through robotic fabrication. It becomes a conversation rather than a linear workflow. So the studio no longer looks like an architect imposing an idea onto matter. It looks more like a dialogue among materials, AI, and human designers, each continually influencing the others. Design emerges through the continuous conversation between material, AI, and architect. 9. What is material intelligence? Material intelligence isn't actually a new idea in architecture. Architects have always worked with material properties, structural behavior, and construction logic. Louis Kahn famously asked, "What does the brick want?" Frei Otto and Gaudí allowed materials to discover efficient forms rather than simply imposing them. So there is already a long architectural tradition of recognizing that materials actively participate in design. What I add is that we can extend this tradition much further. We don't just analyze materials. We experiment openly with composites, casting processes, and physical reactions, working with what I call messy materiality. Material formations that generate unexpected structures and patterns. Those explorations then enter into dialogue with AI, which expands and transforms them before returning to further material experimentation. So material intelligence isn't about giving materials human qualities. It's about recognizing that design emerges through the interaction of humans, materials, and AI, rather than from human intention alone. Materials don't simply receive design, they help produce it. 10. What does distributed agency actually look like in a housing project? A concrete example would be the urban housing studios I taught at Penn and Pratt, often working with NYCHA public housing sites in New York. A conventional studio might begin with the designer's vision, a concept, a massing idea, a formal diagram, and then everything else is made to serve that idea. We work differently. We begin with the site as a real social, political, historical, and material condition. Then we move back and forth between AI models, material models, and human architectural intuition. At the urban scale, for example, we might use AI tools such as Autodesk Forma to generate possible massing strategies. But we don't simply accept the AI output. Students analyze it, select what is promising, translate it into physical molds, and cast composite materials into those molds. When the model comes out, it already carries several agencies: the AI's massing logic, the student's discernment, the mold's geometry, and the material's own curing and aggregation behavior. At the building scale, we do something similar with housing plans. We hybridize precedent plans through AI, but then we scrutinize them architecturally, redraw them, laser cut them, unfold them physically into three-dimensional configurations, and test them as spatial and social organizations. So distributed agency is not an abstract idea here. It is a workflow. The project emerges through the interaction of site, history, AI, material behavior, and architectural knowledge. Design is not authored once. It passes continuously between site, material, AI, and architect until a project begins to emerge. 11. What does AI contribute that humans and materials cannot? The definition of artificial intelligence already tells us something. Traditionally, AI has been defined as performing tasks that previously only humans could perform. So from the very beginning, AI is defined relative to us. Human intelligence remains the measure. I think that's already a limitation. For a long time, AI research assumed that intelligence had to resemble human intelligence. It's a bit like insisting that an airplane has to fly exactly like a bird. Once we stopped insisting on that, aviation became possible. I think AI invites us to make a similar move. Machines don't have to think like humans to be intelligent. Beyond all of AI's practical capabilities, I think its greatest contribution today is philosophical. Because AI is so conversational and so anthropomorphic, it reflects us back to ourselves. It makes visible our assumptions about intelligence, agency, creativity, and our relationship to the more than human world. So, in a sense, AI is becoming a mirror. It doesn't simply help us design differently, it helps us understand ourselves differently. And that may ultimately prove more important than any individual technical capability. Of course, AI also performs tasks at scales and levels of complexity that humans cannot. But I actually think that's the secondary story. The greatest contribution of AI today may not be technological. It may be helping us rethink our place within the more than human world. 12. If architecture is for humans, why should we decenter the human at all? Decentering the human doesn't mean caring less about humans. It means recognizing that human well-being depends entirely on the well-being of much larger ecological systems. For a long time, architecture largely understood its responsibility in human terms. It sought to provide shelter, comfort, cultural meaning, and aesthetic value for people. Today, that is no longer sufficient. Architects also have to think about materials, ecosystems, and the many forms of life with which we share the built environment. So the paradox disappears. The more we understand that humans are embedded within larger material and ecological systems, the more human-conducive design requires us to become less anthropocentric. In other words, we don't decenter the human because humans don't matter. We decenter the human because humans matter. The health of humanity can no longer be separated from the health of everything else that makes human life possible. That changes every architectural question, from whether we should build at all to what we build with, how much we build, whether we can adapt existing buildings instead of constructing new ones, and how architecture participates in ecological regeneration rather than ecological extraction. The best way to care for humanity is to stop pretending humanity stands outside nature. 13. Is AI part of the ecological crisis or part of its solution? AI is not inherently good or bad. There's nothing morally built into the technology itself. But AI is emerging in a moment of profound ecological destabilization, and in its current form, it undeniably participates in that destabilization through its enormous demands for energy, water, minerals, and infrastructure. That is precisely why we have to stop thinking of AI as something abstract or immaterial. Conversations about AI often unfold as if intelligence floated above the material world. It doesn't. AI is deeply material. It consumes matter, energy, water, buildings, and landscapes. AI is not an abstract intelligence, it is a material intelligence. So my argument is not that AI will solve the climate crisis through better technology alone. More efficient models and cleaner energy certainly matter, but I don't think they're enough. The deeper challenge is philosophical. We have to change our relationship to the non-human world. That also changes the way we engage with AI. Before asking how to make AI more efficient, we should also ask whether every engagement with it is necessary or wise. If I think through a problem while drinking a glass of water, my own brain is already solving it with remarkable material efficiency. There are, of course, questions I couldn't answer on my own. But if I immediately outsource the same problem to a large language model, it may consume several gallons of water and far more energy in the process. The point isn't that one is good and the other is bad. It's that every form of intelligence carries material consequences. Ultimately, the ecological question is not whether AI is good or bad. The question is whether AI helps us move beyond the worldview that produced the ecological crisis in the first place, the idea that humans stand apart from nature and that everything else exists merely as a resource to be consumed. If AI helps us overcome that worldview, then it may contribute to ecological healing, not because the technology itself is green, but because it changes the way we think about our place within the material world. The less abstract we imagine AI to be, the more mindful we'll become in how we choose to work with it. The future of AI is not ultimately a technological question. It is a question of our relationship to the material world. 14. If agency is shared, do humans become less important? I don't think it's a zero-sum game. Recognizing agency in non-human actors doesn't diminish human agency. It expands the field in which human agency operates. I recently attended an AI summit where almost every speaker began by reassuring the audience that humans would retain complete creative control. I understand why people say that. There's a lot of anxiety around AI. But I actually think it's a missed opportunity. If we insist on keeping all agency for ourselves, we also limit what design can become. My proposal isn't to surrender human creativity, it's to enrich it. By recognizing the capacities of materials, AI, and other participants, we widen the space of possible design solutions. The same is true more broadly. If we approach AI from the outset as an enemy, we'll likely build adversarial systems. If we approach it as a participant in a shared process of learning and creation, we'll likely build very different systems. So I don't see decentering the human as leading to passivity. Quite the opposite. It asks us to become more attentive, more responsible, and more imaginative participants within larger systems. Sharing agency doesn't reduce our possibilities, it multiplies them. 15. What future am I actually hoping for? My hope is fundamentally an ecological one. I don't worry about the planet itself. The Earth has survived far greater transformations than us. What I worry about is the future of our own species and the extraordinary diversity of life with which we share this planet and upon which we depend. I think the ecological crisis ultimately reflects a crisis of worldview. If we continue believing that humans stand apart from nature, that we are exceptional and everything else exists primarily to serve us, we'll continue repeating the same mistakes, whether in architecture, technology, or AI. My hope is that AI becomes part of a broader cultural shift, not because AI will solve our problems for us, but because it invites us to rethink what intelligence, creativity, and participation actually mean. If it helps us see ourselves as participants in a shared material world rather than standing outside it, then I think it will have made an extraordinary contribution. Ultimately, my hope is not for better AI. My hope is for a better relationship between humans, technology, and the living world. The future I'm hoping for isn't one in which AI becomes more human. It's one in which humans become better participants in the shared world we already inhabit. 16. Where do I think AI is heading next? My hope is that AI becomes genuinely open, not simply in the sense of one particular company, but as a shared human project rather than the instrument of a handful of corporations or governments. I think one of the greatest risks isn't AI itself. It's the concentration of AI in centralized political and economic power. Like any powerful technology, AI can be used for domination as easily as for collaboration. So the question isn't only what kind of AI do we build, it's also who owns it, who governs it, and who benefits from it. Perhaps the deeper question is whether intelligence can ever truly be owned. The more relational intelligence becomes, the more difficult it is to imagine it as private property. A genuinely open AI ultimately requires forms of stewardship that reach beyond exclusive ownership. Technically, I think we'll also see the boundaries begin to dissolve. Today we think in separate categories: human, AI, robot, material. AI may become increasingly embodied, learning through sensory engagement with the world rather than through data alone. I expect those interfaces to become increasingly continuous. Materials themselves may become computationally informed, robotics will become more adaptive, and AI will move from being something we consult to something embedded within the material processes of design and fabrication. So I don't think the future is about humans versus AI. I think it's about building more integrated systems in which intelligence is distributed across people, materials, and machines. I choose a hopeful view that together we can cultivate an open, equitable, and ecological artificial intelligence in shared materiality. 17. What is the biggest misunderstanding of my position? The biggest misunderstanding is that my position is somehow anti-human. It isn't. Quite the opposite. Like everyone else, I hope for a peaceful, healthy, and flourishing future for humanity. I just don't believe we'll get there by continuing to place humans at the center of every question, as if we existed independently of everything else. My argument isn't against humans, it's against human exceptionalism. Those are very different things. That's why I distinguish between anthropocentric design and what I call human-conducive design. Anthropocentric design places humans above everything else. Human-conducive design seeks to create conditions in which humans can flourish without assuming that everything else exists merely for our benefit. I think the future of humanity depends on recognizing that we are embedded within larger material, ecological, and technological systems. Human flourishing doesn't require us to stand above the non-human world. It depends on learning to live well within it. That's why I distinguish between putting humans at the center and creating conditions that are conducive to human life. Those are not the same thing. We can design for human well-being without treating everything else as existing merely for our benefit. In fact, I think that's the only path toward a genuinely sustainable future. The future I'm arguing for is not less human, it's more humane. 18. What does today's AI debate get fundamentally wrong? I think the biggest mistake in today's AI debate is that it's framed as a binary. AI is either portrayed as humanity's savior or as humanity's downfall. I don't think either position is very helpful. AI is neither inherently good nor inherently bad. Like architecture, it's always embedded within larger material, social, ecological, and political systems. The real question isn't whether we should fear AI or celebrate it. The question is what kind of relationship we want to build with it. If we move beyond a purely human-centered perspective, the discussion changes. It becomes less about competition between humans and machines, and more about how different forms of intelligence, human, biological, material, and artificial, can participate in a shared future. Ultimately, I don't think the choice is between optimism and pessimism. The choice is between continuing to think in terms of hierarchy and domination, or learning to think in terms of participation and coexistence. The future won't be decided by whether AI is good or bad. It will be decided by the kinds of relationships we choose to build. 19. If readers remember only one thing, what should it be? If there's one thing I'd like people to take away, it's that we're in this together. AI is not an abstract intelligence floating above the physical world. It's deeply embedded in the same material world that we inhabit. It depends on energy, water, minerals, infrastructures, and ultimately on the planet itself. Artificial intelligence is also a material intelligence. If we can move beyond human exceptionalism, I don't think AI needs to be either feared or glorified. It becomes part of a much larger ecological project, learning to understand ourselves as participants in a shared material world rather than masters standing outside it. Ultimately, my book isn't really about AI. It's about our relationship to the world. We don't design the world from above, we design from within it. 20. Can we really collaborate with AI? One of the strongest objections to my argument is this. Can we really speak of collaboration if AI has no intentions, no moral autonomy, and no responsibility of its own? I think that's an important question, but it depends on what we mean by collaboration. I'm not arguing that AI is a human peer or a moral agent. My point is simply that design has never been produced by human intention alone. In architecture, materials, gravity, climate, codes, labor, software, and now AI all participate in shaping the work. Some of these actors are heteronymous. They do not determine their own ends, but heteronomy is not the same as passivity. Concrete does not choose its purpose, yet it still acts. AI may not currently set its own goals, but it can nevertheless introduce novelty, resistance, surprise, and forms of intelligence that exceed the designer's foresight. So I distinguish moral agency from material or generative agency. Humans remain morally responsible, but design itself emerges from a wider field of participation. That is what I mean by shared materiality. You have been listening to 20 Questions on Material and Artificial Intelligence in Architecture by Jonas Coersmeier. The book is published by Wiley. Further essays and audio can be found at Material AI on Substack.